us to make the chat box a little bigger. It's a little hard to see. So we have a lot of architects. We're jealous that Andrew is in Vancouver Island. And maybe it's not possible for you all to turn on your videos, but I'm certainly curious to see other people's faces. It may not be possible. In any case, I know we only have an hour, so I want to encourage all of you, first of all, to just use the room chat. Don't use the Q&A chat. Let's keep it all public. So as we're proceeding, if you haven't yet announced yourself and told us where you're from and what you do and why you're here. There we go. I knew Mary from Philly. Welcome. Then please do so that we can get a little bit of a sense of who we're with. So my name is Sam Shaltane. I'm not an architect, although I am a partner in a design studio. The design studio is called 180. And my main business partner is an architect. Some of you may be familiar with him, Trung Lee. He's one of the best in the world when it comes to designing spaces. And we have just released a new book that was a 2-year collaborative project. You see an image of it on your screen. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. And I want to talk to you about it by way of an origin story, a case study, and then to finish with a sense of your questions. Does that sound good to everybody? So the first thing that I want to say is if you look on the note, at least for me, it's the upper right-hand corner. I assume it's the same for you. There's a few websites you can check out. There's the website of 180 Studio, if you're interested. We do work with and in schools all over the world. But also the subject of this talk is Seed and Spark. And if you follow that website, seedandspark.live, you can not only find out where, if you're interested in the book, you can buy it on Amazon, but you can also get a digital copy for free. So if you fill out, it's basically as long as you give us your email address, when this is over, I'll send you a PDF. You're going to see some images from the book, and part of our idea for a project that is literally about trying to seed and spark new ideas and ways of thinking is to make those seeds able to travel as far and wide as possible. Hi, Lily from Portland. Hi, Athi from Chicago. Tom, thank you all. If you want to, again, scroll through the chat to get a sense of who else is here. It appears that we're mostly architects and interior designers. And just as a quick check, and everybody doesn't need to respond, but maybe one person, I'm assuming the audio is okay and everybody can hear me all right. Can I get an amen from the choir somewhere out there to make sure that that's true? All right. So I want to tell you a little bit about the origin story so that then we can get into the gist of this. So some of you may be familiar with a book that my business partner wrote a few years ago called The Third Teacher. I see somebody said they can't see the notes posted. And so I'm just going to copy and paste them right into the chat. So these are the 3 websites that I was talking about. One is where I post my writings. One is my studio. And then seedandspark.live is where you can request a free copy of the book that is the focus of today's talk, or you can order a hard copy on Amazon, your choice. But so a few years ago, my partner wrote this book called The Third Teacher. Some of you may be familiar with it. I'm sure many of you are certainly familiar with the Reggio Emilia concept of the third teacher. that the physical environment is the third teacher. And actually that book is how Lee and I met, because like a lot of people, I found that book and found it to be revelatory and so helpful. I'm an ex-English and history teacher from New York City. So as I mentioned at the outset, I'm not an architect, but I do a lot of work in physical design and in mostly in storytelling. But what we wanted to do was produce a book that could be as useful as the third teacher was. And, you know, do I have a copy around here somewhere? The third teacher is like, it's like the heavily dog-eared Bible that people that are redesigning a school space use. And what started us in thinking was, what would be that useful, but for the equivalent of holistic learning design? So not just spatial, but cultural, structural, pedagogical, the whole ball of wax. Like in the same way that DNA has been reduced to, you know, A, G, C, and T. What's the A, G, C, and T of comprehensive learning design? So that was the riddle that we set out in search of 2 years ago. And it seems obvious now, but we didn't think heading out on that we were going to end up looking at the natural world. But the reason I say it seems obvious is, of course, right? I mean, we Homo sapiens have only been on the earth for plus or minus 200,000 years, and we've only been kind of organizing ourselves intentionally for a much smaller percentage. Whereas Mother Nature has been figuring out the ideal principles for creating a dynamic balance of life for billions of years. And so what was really encouraging to us, and I mean, it's kind of naive to say it now, but surprising, was that there are these core design principles of the natural world. And they're actually expressed in a way that is pretty familiar. And so I want to show you a short video.
There are elements in the world that we must recognize. Elements that are crucial to enable all living systems to thrive. They can give voice, clarity, and meaning. To form a new story for how we learn and live.
Now, on one level, that gives you a quick bead, but let's go a little slower. And by that, I'm going to show you the table of contents in the book, which outlines these 7 principles. So some of you I can see by your will do. I just saw to mute my mic during video. I think that's the last video. Actually, no, there's one more. So thank you, Aaron, for the tip. So one of the things that we've learned is that for a dynamic living system to take root, the core seeds for growth of a living system are identity, information, and relationships. And I will say, as a storyteller, one of the things that was a bit of a relief for me to discover, and this is based on a lot of work of people that have gone before us, including, but not limited to, Fritjof Capra, from a variety of fields. So this is not our theory. This is just us trying to kind of build a breadcrumb trail around and breathe life into the work of others so that we can start to pick up those threads and design more intentionally maybe than we have in the past. So as a storyteller, I like the universality of this concept of identity, information, and relationships. That those are not fancy pants words. Those are not words that don't immediately conjure up some pretty clear images that haven't been as corrupted or subject to wildly different interpretations than, say, freedom. And what was interesting for me is to learn the extent to which these principles apply at every scale, from the cosmologic to the subatomic. So the process by which stem cells become white blood cells or become brain, neurons, etc., is basically a function of the interplay of identity, information, and relationships. But of course, this is just as true for the systems that we all live in and perpetuate, and for those of us that are designers are trying to set the conditions for. And I'll give a case study in a little bit, and then we can shift to your questions. But in any case, as a quick, sense, those are the three conditions that allow a living system to take root. And then the seeds for change are through the principle of emergence. And if you're interested in emergence, and if it's a relatively new concept, there's a great book by Stephen Johnson called Emergence, which really fleshes this out. But you see examples of this all over the place. The Arab Spring is an example of emergence. So are some of the more extreme weather patterns that we see. So is jazz. So is the experience of epiphany. And so as we think about designing, one of the things that has changed the way that we approach our own work is to be much more emergent in how we think about that work, that we are actually setting the conditions for emergence rather than setting the conditions for making sure that we know exactly when everything is going to happen and why. And then the last bit is this idea of seeds for a generation, that once you have a living system with a clear sense of individual and shared identity, with a clear process for information to move, with high quality and quantity of relationships, and with the ability to shapeshift through the principle of emergence, patterns, processes, and structures are what allows that system to keep regenerating. One thing I want to call attention to in the early step is the fact that usually when we think about design, we start with structures. We start with the things we can see, the things we can touch, the things that are most immovable. But the lesson of the natural world is that's actually where we end. Adding structures to a system is the last thing that you do, not the first. But it's one thing for me to say all of that, and I also just want to, kind of make clear from the outset, we have an hour, which is comical, right? The idea that we have an hour to discuss using nature as a model for how we design. So I just want to be clear, my hope and expectation is that this is like a first meeting, a first date, where we're able to at least kind of get some basic ideas out on the table, and then through our ability to stay connected to one another, and hopefully through the fact that there's literally a whole book of unpacking this topics, that we can dive a little deeper. Are we good so far? You with me? So what I want to do is I want to take this frame that you see on the screen for a test drive, at least the first part. And given that it's now 2 days after Election Day, and given that we're all still trying to figure out how to make sense of what just happened, this is my 7-year-old. You can come on over. I'm the father of 2. I can't print something right now, but I will in a little bit. I want to, let's use the United States as a case study for these images that you see on the screen. And so let's do that by way of thinking through these issues of identity, information, and relationships, and the ways in which that has set the stage for certain things to be emerging in the body politic. And then after that, I'd really like to see what questions you all have that can dictate how we go. So the main thing that I want to, I'm going to show you a video. Some of you may have seen it. This is a video that came on was a Harvard professor who was appearing on a news program and gave a very articulate, nuanced deconstruction of, I think, the core aspect of American identity and where we are right now. And so I'm going to show you that video, and thanks to Aaron, I'm going to mute my audio, and then we can come back together. But the main thing I want you to be listening for is the ways in which Dr. Glaude is articulating what is at the root of American identity. Let me mute myself.
You know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them and the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, that 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
Powerful words, and I think in particular what struck me about what Dr. Glaude had to say is that refrain that this is us. And you see, right, when we think about identity, and when we're thinking about identity from the perspective of understanding it as designers and trying to understand how nature uses it in design, then it really is this question, right? How has the old story shaped how we see, and what is the new story waiting to be born? And lest we think, not that any of us do, but lest we think that this is some issue that is restricted to Dr. Glaude and the 2020 election. In each of these chapters, the way that we try to unpack it is we try to offer case studies of how this principle plays out. So a case study from science. So if we think about identity, the case study is the bihemispheric nature of the brain. right? It's pretty interesting when you think about it. Why do we basically have a parallel processor, two totally different ways of seeing the world? But we also use a case study from art. And, the case study that we used was James Baldwin, who 50 years ago was making all of the same points that Dr. Glaude is making, that in effect, the primary root of identity in America is anchored in our original sin as a country of slaves and slave holders. And that the epigenetic ways that has manifested over the generations are still very much an aspect of who we are. So again, I said we're going to use the United States as a case study, and it can be, I think, a little dispiriting to do so because the problems are so big. But just bear with me, all right? Our task in the next hour is not to solve the problems of the American body politic, but it is to use it as a way to better understand some of what this framework will hopefully help us see and begin to use differently in the ways that we approach our own work, right? So in other words, Baldwin has been saying this for a while. So that's one of the ways that we think about identity. But I'm giving you the quick version. So then if we also think about information, right? The vitality of a living system is always shaped and sustained by the extent to which information is able to travel freely, and the information that is most relevant is able to be accessed. Whether you're a white blood cell or a white farmer, there's certain types of information that you most need. And I think if we use the US as an example when it comes to this, in some respects, the information that is most relevant to us, if we're going to take seriously what Dr. Glaude just asked us to take seriously, the information that matters is the information that lets us actually confront the ugliness of us, of America in 2020. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying if we use nature as a guide, the only way the living system that is America can heal itself is by confronting that information. The problem, of course, is we all inhabit our own filter bubbles. So the information that we receive, wherever you are on the political spectrum, is likely to be self-selected. If you're a Democrat, most of your friends are probably Democrats. If you're a Republican, most of your friends are Republican. If you look at, two people on opposite sides of the political spectrum and you look at their Facebook feeds, it's like two totally different worlds. But again, our problem is not to solve that. It's just to acknowledge that if we see it from a living systems perspective, hopefully you see both the information that is required at the national level and the challenges of having that information flow freely. The good news is none of us is running for president, and therefore we have slightly lower bars to address when it comes to this issue. And then the last thing I want to kind of talk about here to understand how this works is then the third principle, the third seed for growth is relationships. And, as an ex-English teacher, anybody that's a teacher knows instinctively, anybody that's a parent knows instinctively, anybody that's trying to be a good partner or spouse knows instinctively that relationships make the world go round, and that the quality of one's life is immediately determined by the quality and the quantity of the relationships that you have. It's interesting to me the extent to which this is equally true in systems design and in living systems, and even in quantum theory. Any of the geeks out there that have kind of gone down the quantum mechanics rabbit hole know that the primary word that is used to describe the interactivity of subatomic particles is relationship. And the reason is because a subatomic particle is always simultaneously the potential of a particle and a wave. So one of the things that has been understood now in quantum science is that you can't observe, you, the scientist, cannot observe a subatomic particle without immediately determining the behavior of the particle. That the moment you observe it, it changes the nature of the relationship, which is one way of basically making the point that I think a lot of us have always instinctively known to be true, which is that the idea of detached objectivity is false. And that, as you see on this page here, it's not critical mass that we're seeking. So if you're a part of a design project and you're, trying to get buy-in is a horrible word. It's a misleading phrase. It's not critical mass, it's critical connections. And the president, I think we see very clearly, if you look at the United States, right? We are a fractured nation. We are in the midst of actively counting ballots. We still don't know who the next president is. And it's safe to say that whoever ultimately wins, half the country is not only going to be disappointed, but they're going to be convinced that the other side cheated. How on earth do we begin to repair the relationships that exist? Well, I mean, the short version is if you backwards map, it's only through a clear understanding of what information needs to circulate and how and where, and why that needs to happen for the purpose of clarifying who and why we are at the individual and at the collective level. This is all for the purpose, from a design perspective, of trying to set the conditions for emergence. And if we think about what has emerged in 2020, what hasn't emerged in 2020 is a better way to put it. But whether it's the virus emerging, whether it's the social justice protests in the wake of the videotaping of George Floyd's murder, whether it's the rise of the Boogaloo movement, whether it's what emerges in the coming weeks in the aftermath of this highly contentious election, this is the way that the system, the living system, which in this case is the United States of America, is signaling its desire to disrupt itself from its own current path. One of the interesting things about, kind of paying more attention to living systems in the natural world is growth in a living system comes from disequilibrium, not from stasis. So this is the challenge. But again, and I see that some questions are starting to come in, and that's good. We're about to shift to that because we only have 30 more minutes, and I wanted to make sure that I saved at least half of the time for what it is that you all wanted to talk about. So the last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll begin with Andrew's question, is what's happening right now at the national level. I forget who said this, but I think it's a really good way to think about it. It's not that things are getting worse; it's that they're getting revealed. And so on a national level, the question is, what do we do? How are we in a position? Do we have a clear enough sense of individual and collective identity to actually confront the information of what's being revealed? Luckily, we don't have to figure that out. And that's the bad news, right? Is in giving you this example in this particular moment, in a system as large as the United States, a lot of work and healing is required. But the good news is that how we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale, which means, for better or for worse, the work that is required at the national level begins now. It begins today, and it begins with you. And full stop. And I think one of the best ways that all of us, because we're here in a professional context, not necessarily a personal context, we're here wearing our professional hats as architects and interior designers. Applying these principles from the natural world to the way that we think about our work as designers is a way in our professional realm to develop the muscle memory of better understanding how to function more healthfully as a member of a living system. So you can imagine, if I go back to the table of contents, just so that you can see all 7 principles in one image. And again, if you go to seedandspark.live, you can have this book for free. So if you just imagine this, I'm going to give you a specific example, right? So we work with a lot of schools. So in any design project that we're doing, one of the advantages of a design project is it usually results in the most tangible thing, which is just like a big fucking hole in the ground, right? Like, oh my God, how are we going to fill this hole? What is this building going to be? What is this master plan? How are we going to design this space? And again, we usually start with structures. It makes sense that we tend to gravitate towards the things that we can see, the things that we can touch, the things that we can hold. But of course, the real measure of health in a community, the real measure of success in a design project is the extent to which you help people focus in a sustained way on the intangible aspects, on the things that a group of people has informally agreed never to discuss, on the elephant in the room, on the things that people are afraid of. The way to ground those conversations initially is through this question of identity, right? One of the first questions that we always ask people when we're just like in the focus group phase is, hey, Creative Commons, right? If you like this question, use it, take it as your own. But if we're working with a school, let's imagine whether we're talking with the kids at that school or the parents or the staff. Wherever you are in the world, there's a lot of schools, a lot of places you could have chosen to forge a career, to become a high school student, to send your beloved son or daughter. Why did you choose this one? And then why? So that's the first part of the question. Then the second part is, what keeps you here? So what do we need to know about this place? What is special about this place? Who are these people? Who is this school? What is it that binds you? There are lots of other ways that one can explore that. And I just want to say, because again, this is just like, a first date. At the back of every section, we try to offer a few very concrete ways that you can think about this question of identity. And this is just a partial list, right? But if I point to the last one, I told you that one of the examples in identity in the chapter was the science of the bihemispheric nature of the brain. So here's a fun thing, right? Map your learning culture according to the 2 hemispheres of the brain. In which ways is your culture organized intentionally or unintentionally to value me-based, linear, analytical, rational left hemisphere thinking? In which ways is it structured to value we-based, nonlinear, metaphoric, holistic right hemisphere thinking? And the whole point, right, it's not like you have to be one or the other. You just have to be in balance. And almost all of us are out of balance, literally and metaphorically. So being grounded in identity is an invitation to come back into balance. There's so much more that I could say. I feel like I need to stop talking and start to pay attention to some of the questions that have come in. So can I do that? And because apparently I can't see you or hear you and you all can't see or hear each other, we're just going to have to rely on me both sharing your questions and also sharing your responses. So I just want to invite everybody to not only ask questions, but to also offer your own wisdom, your own insights, your own experiences, and I will do my best to raise them up for the whole group. So Andrew's first question, how do we promote the spread? How do we promote the spread of factual information when so many people reject fact-based news in favor of conspiracy theories because it sells better? Holy shit, Andrew, I wish I knew. I don't. The good news is, for our purpose as designers, that is not a direct question that we have to answer. That is more a question for Mark Zuckerberg than it is for us. What is a key part of our question, because if we're good designers, we're not only coming in with a vision of what the spatial program and design should be, but we should always make sure that we have as a part of our core team people who have the expertise and the sensibility to help frame the conversation and the aperture for our clients so that they can think about the version of that question for them would be, actually, I'll give you an example. If I go ahead to information and inquiry seeds at the back, what needs to be clear in any community is, first of all, what is the information that is most relevant for people to access? And is it allowed to travel freely? So I'll give you an example, right? In the context of the way that a lot of us work. When I taught at a private school in Brooklyn, I found out that if you approached the head of school independently at the end of the school year and said, hey, I saw what the standard raise was, but you know, I feel like I've really done a good job and would you give me a little more? She would give you more. But I only knew that because somebody else told me. So that is an example of an unhealthy culture, right? I mean, I think it's very powerful when cultures have open book management. So you can find out what anybody makes. I'm not saying you have to recommend that your clients do that, but that's an important question. How is information traveling? This is, you know, what are the ways in which information is able to travel? What are the informal and formal methods for that? Because even a school culture has its own de facto filter bubbles. And part of the test of a successful master plan or design project is its ability to puncture and penetrate those bubbles. Tomas adds, similar to an ecosystem, we need to use the waste to use it for growth in a closed loop system. Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. We are an open system. We're not a closed system. We're not a thermostat. Schools, for those of you that work with schools often try to culturally imagine as though they are a thermostat. That's a closed loop system, right? I want the temperature in here to be 72 degrees. I can set my thermostat to 72 degrees, and if I have a decent heating system, it will just maintain itself for that. This is exactly what we in education have done with test-based accountability. It's treating people as though they're a part of a closed loop system. And you see the results of that. So again, in an open loop system, stability comes from disequilibrium. We have to be willing to be disturbed. This is all a part of the way that not only we think about design, but we think about the interrelationship of the different aspects of what we're designing. Andrew asks, are you encouraged by the increase in discussion and knowledge around biophilic design and how that can be applied to the built learning environment? Yes, so much. And actually, I want to highlight one example from the book, which is a great example of this. So I did mention that every chapter, I'm going to go back to the table of contents real quick just so you can see it visually. So you'll see that the deconstruction of every chapter is there's an intro essay, right? Why are we talking about identity? There's a case study from science. There's a case study from art. There's an interview with a person whose whole life and work has been dedicated to that principle. So if we stick with identity, it's Thich Nhat Hanh, reflecting on the significance of identity through a Buddhist lens. And then there's a whole school case study. And so the one that I want to point you to is actually the very last one in the book. And it's a public charter school in Chicago. It's called the Academy for Global Citizenship. And one of the things that's really interesting, I'll show you just the first page of the. So this is a school that was started by a young woman with a vision who wanted to have really the backbone of the learning experience be engaging children in the natural world, and children who were largely in urban settings. A lot of these kids are living in poverty, so kids that are starting out with less access to the natural world than other people. And I see, Tomas, your question, this is exactly one of the ways. So every chapter ends this way with a different example. So these are always, the book is showing how these principles are used in a school. But like a lot of charter schools, the first place that AGC was housed was like in a formal barrel factory. So they're teaching kids about the natural world, but they're teaching them in the midst of, a concrete jungle. And so it's only now, after a while, that they're able to articulate this very different vision of a living school. And so the story that you'll read is the story about how this comes to being, where basically they purchased, with the help of money from the state, an empty parcel of land in Chicago. And you see the vision, which is to have it be a living school. And not for nothing, but the school is designing what you see here. And here's another view of what it looks like on the inside. They're designing all of this, but I'm going to go back to this because I feel like that's a slightly more interesting visual. They're designing all of this with under the exact same budgetary allotment that any other Chicago public school would have. So what you see here is not possible because they went out and raised $70 million from Jeff Bezos. It is what they are going to build on the existing budget that Chicago Public Schools gives them. And so here's part of it, like, why aren't we all doing this? We should all be doing this. Every school should be a living school. I mean, every school should be a living school in the way that we think about it spatially as designers, but every school should be a living school in the way that we think about it curricularly, and so on. So one of the things that makes me hopeful, and one of the reasons we're so excited about the book, is that as we got into understanding not only the framework, but looking around, there are a lot of existing examples of schools that are doing different parts of this well. Schools that are intentionally designing themselves based on all 7 principles, we hope that's what's next. But schools that really get the identity part right, yes. Schools that really get the patterns or processes part right, yes. And that's what you'll kind of find more about here. I'm just, other questions that are occurring to you as you're hearing what's been said so far? There are 63 of you out there. But right now, I'm hearing mostly from Andrew and Tomas. And don't get me wrong, Andrew and Tomas, I love it, but I'd love to hear some questions from the rest of you. I've thrown a lot at you. I think you'll see, if I go back, the central point that we're trying to make in this project is that we're all a part of this new world that is struggling to be born. And in order to do that, we have to be willing to not only try to elevate a different story, but to try to live a new story, a story that is really grounded in the natural world, and a story that allows us to kind of right size our role, our footprint, literal and figurative. I'm actually in that spirit. I want to show you one other short video, and also just hold a little more space to see what questions you have.
Engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Sometimes there are moments in human history that seem to beckon awakenings. We evaluate our beliefs, assumptions, and reigning cultural stories. They invite us to create new rules, new structures, and new processes. To see it, we must shift where we stand. This is the time. This is the moment.
In the spirit of this being, in the spirit of this being the time and the moment, I'm going to ask a different prompt, and then I'll get to Pat's question. So the prompt is, what is becoming clear to you? In fact, let me write it. And I want you to take that question on whatever scale you want. So it could be something becoming clear to you as a result of the last 30 minutes of conversation, or it could be something becoming clear to you as a result of being at this moment in your own personal journey, or it could be becoming clear to you with regard to what's happening in America. So as you think about that, and people weigh in the chat, Pat's question is, beyond social media, what impacts will technology have on our ability to reconnect, to see pathways for those seeds? Really interesting question. So we are in the midst, this is relevant to the answering the questions, the question, Pat. We're in the midst of doing a design project with a public university. And this university's initial idea was that they needed a new building, and they wanted it to be a digital learning center. And they wanted it to be a place that helped build digital literacy across the students, across the student body. But once we started having the conversations, again, in that earlier part of the design, trying to understand the core identity of the place, the aspirations of the place, the thing that needed to emerge most urgently, it was clear that even calling it the Digital Learning Center was the wrong name. That on one level, it's undeniable that technology is pretty powerful. I mean, this is pretty cool, right? 60 of us that are able to communicate in real time, and I can show you these images from the book and play video seamlessly. And at the same time, I can't see any of you, and I can't even hear any of you. So it's both connective and disorienting. And actually, the opportunity of the moment in social media or in design or in anything else is to double down on the aspects. I mean, you see this slide right here, the fullness of our humanity. So, you know, what does it mean to be human? That's a timeless question. That's the reason people are still reading Hamlet 400 years later. But it's more relevant now because we're the people that happen to be living in the shadow of the technological singularity. We're the people that are starting to witness a greater merging of the physical and the biological and the social spheres. That's the fourth industrial revolution. So I think the main thing is to be aware of the undeniable growth in use of technology and the inescapable limitations that those mediums will have on our ability to feel more connected to one another. I want to read some of the things that have been said. What has become clear is the need to give humanity a goal. What is our goal as a species? There's a lot of talk about that in the book, Robert. And of course, one of the, if we think about the story, right, that one of the things that we really want to do with this project is change the story. The story we've been living under is the story that emerged, it's the Cartesian idea. It's the Newtonian idea. It's linear. It's left hemisphere. It's cause and effect. It's the world is a machine, and we merely need to understand its parts. To me, our goal as a species is to it's not a new story, because it's actually what the wisest among us have always known, which is the world is not a machine. We are not machines. And even the laws of physics don't reinforce that, as the quantum theorists have shown us, that everything is connected and everything is both cause and effect. That's the lesson of an open system. That's also, I think, a really important lesson for the granular work all of us do in our professions as designers. And hopefully it's equally valuable in the way that all of us think about the way that we show up in the world. Ross adds, what's become clear is that we are systems, and what we create are systems, and our systems are inseparable from the world. Yeah, there's a line somewhere in this book, Ross. There's a great theoretical cognitive scientist named David Bohm who said, thought makes the world, and then says, I didn't do it. And that was part of the point that Dr. Glaude makes, that, if you are on this call and, you are not a fan of Donald Trump, Dr. Glaude's message is for you, which is, he's just a manifestation of what is within us. That is within us. The problem is not outside. The problem is here. And of course, transformation is first and foremost an inside job. Maria, wait, hold on. I've skipped a few people. Deb says, we need to join together to solve these serious challenges of how we are related to each other and how we relate to the planet we are not apart from. God, yes, amen. And Mary adds, and our systems need to coexist with each other, not necessarily change, but coexist. Amen. And again, because we all are colliding in a professional context, the recurring question I have for all of you is, what implications does this have for your work? In what ways might this change how you go about your work and how you show up as a professional? In what ways might it deepen the ways in which you creatively engage with your clients to yield a better final vision of what needs to happen? As Robert says, the primal inherent need to survive with the knowledge of the systems of our planet and how those systems are connected. Yeah. And what better way to start spreading that level of awareness than by making sure that every design project that we're a part of, if it does nothing else, it leaves the people we work with, our clients, with a deeper understanding, a deeper appreciation, and a finer ability to see and sense the patterns of those living systems and the ways in which they're shaping the overall health or sickness of the larger organizational culture. Pat says, what is clear, nature and our humanity within it is foundational. It always has been. However, we continue to seek more without looking, connecting, and touching what is within arm's length at our personal moments in time. Yeah, I want to show you. You'll see that at the very beginning of the book is a letter to the reader, and the way we began it is, this book was written for the person who was holding it. That even though Seed and Spark was written, again, right, like our foundational question was, what are the irreducible elements of a really healthy, comprehensive learning environment? Not just the physical space, but the way in which it all comes together. And we hope and expect that it will be useful for all of you in your work as you think about how those pieces go together. And fundamentally, at the center of all of this is the work that each of us does as individuals, right? Again, Dr. Glaude, this is us. Do we have the strength of sense of our own individual and collective identity in order to courageously confront the information that only if and when we confront it will yield a higher quantity and quality of meaningful relationships, and in so doing allow the better angels of our nature and a more perfect union to emerge. There is no other path. Or, as Dr. Glaude said, we will be back here again and again and again, just as James Baldwin's writing 50 years ago has shown. We're almost out of time, but Faye wrote, I believe that the exterior learning environments unify, but it is sometimes to convince educators, district administrators, or funding sources to take that outside. Not sure how we change the mindset to take education outside. That's a good question. What I have found is there's, I'm writing a word. You have that word very much at the center of the work that we do, and the way that I think about it applying is by this, right? That the main question you want to get people to wrestle with is, of all the things we can do, what must we do? And in order to do that, you can't move too quickly to the structures and the pretty bits. I mentioned to you a little bit ago this university that we're working with about a digital learning center. The way that we work as a studio, as you might guess, based on what you've heard over the last hour, is we spend a lot of time initially just telling those stories. What are the conversations we need to be having with one another so that we can get to the point where we answer this question of all the things we can do, what must we do? And sometimes people get impatient and they're like, I thought we would be at architectural renderings by now. And we're like, no. The first thing we have to do is we have to surface what's the language, what's the story, what's the shared aspiration of these people at this moment. And if I stick with that example, the way that we got to must is only through those conversations, enough people were like, you know, maybe we shouldn't call it a digital learning center. Maybe signaling digital is actually the wrong message. Maybe what we must do is create a different kind of entity altogether. So I think, Faye, and I'm going to end with this, the way that first of all, you don't change the mindset. You don't get anybody to do anything. The only thing you can do is create the conditions to create the greatest likelihood that the greatest number of people will have a meaningful epiphany that helps them answer this question: what must we do? Some will, some won't. But all you can do as designers is set the conditions, follow the meaning, ground yourself in the design principles of the natural world, and build the muscle memory to become comfortable with the discomfort of working more emergently. Thank you so much. I don't know if you have my contact information anywhere, so I'm going to write my email into the chat. Please go to seedandspark.live. You can order a hard copy of the book on Amazon, but you don't have to spend any money if you don't want it. You can also just request a copy for free. I would love to stay connected to some of you and to find out more about your own work and the wisdom that I can glean from that path. So thank you all very much.